6 weeks. That's how long I've been listening, completely conscious but unable to move, as my husband of 12 years orchestrates my death with my own sister. Every day, I lie here watching them plan what they call my unfortunate accident, while they think I'm lost in a coma, unaware they've already changed my will. As I lie here in room 427 of St. Mary's Hospital, the cruel irony suffocates me more than any breathing tube could. For 15 years, I built my career as a criminal prosecutor specializing in insurance fraud. I've sent dozens of people to prison for elaborate schemes just like this one. Now I'm witnessing the most intricate fraud of my career from the most helpless position imaginable, as the intended victim. The ventilator hisses rhythmically beside my bed, its mechanical rhythm matching my carefully controlled breathing. I've learned to sync my natural breaths with its artificial pattern, maintaining the illusion of dependency. The doctors say I could breathe on my own, but that would be the first sign of recovery. And improvement isn't part of Michael and Claire's plan. The new will is almost processed, I hear Michael whisper to my sister during their nightly visits. Once it's official, your position as executor will let us move everything offshore before anyone notices. Claire's response sends chills through my supposedly unconscious body. The doctors are reducing her sedation next week. We need to move faster. The irony of their choice of conspirator isn't lost on me. Claire, my own sister, who stood beside me at my wedding, who held my hand through law school, who helped me build my reputation as one of Boston's top fraud prosecutors. Now she's using everything she learned from my cases to help my husband orchestrate my death. I wonder if she learned about offshore accounts from the Kingston case, where I prosecuted a husband for orchestrating his wife's disappearance. The similarities make me want to laugh, but I maintain my practiced stillness. During the day, Michael plays his role flawlessly. "We were finally ready to start a family," he tells my colleagues who visit, his voice breaking with rehearsed emotion. The doctors say there's still hope, but he lets the sentence trail off, a masterclass in performative grief. If only they could see him at night, hunched over legal documents with Claire, discussing untraceable bank transfers and fabricated accident scenarios. The law firm we built together, Winters and Shaw, was supposed to be our legacy. Now it's just another asset they're trying to strip away. I hear them discussing the partnership dissolution, planning to transfer my equity shares before anyone realizes what's happening. They're thorough, I'll give them that. But their thoroughness is becoming their weakness. They're leaving a trail, and I'm memorizing every detail. Night nurse Sarah has become my unexpected ally, though she doesn't know it yet. I notice her lingering in my room during their evening visits, her movements becoming deliberately slower when they discuss certain details. Her pencil scratches against paper after they leave, taking notes, I hope. In my line of work, I learned that justice often hinges on unexpected witnesses. The fragments of their plan float around my room like dust motes in sunlight. The altered will, the offshore accounts, the accident they're planning during my supposed recovery. Each whispered conversation, every rustling document, all the careful preparations. I catalog them with the same precision I once used to build cases in court. Michael always said my attention to detail was impressive. He's about to discover just how right he was. "Everything needs to look natural," Claire whispers one night. "Like a tragic setback during recovery. The insurance company will investigate." Michael's response carries a confidence that makes my skin crawl. That's why we have Dr. Reynolds on board. His testimony about common complications during coma recovery will be crucial. I remember Dr. Reynolds from a case 3 years ago. He was an expert witness in a medical fraud trial. I should have known he'd appear in my story too. The pieces are fitting together like a perfect puzzle, except they don't realize I can see the whole picture. As I lie here gathering evidence, I think about what I always told young prosecutors. The perfect crime requires a perfect victim, someone who can't fight back, can't speak up, can't reveal the truth. Michael and Claire chose me because they thought I was that perfect victim. Instead, they've given me a front row seat to their own downfall. Tonight, they'll return like they always do, thinking they're alone with an unconscious woman. They'll whisper their plans, adjust their schemes, and believe they're in control. But they're performing on a stage they don't know exists, and I'm the most attentive audience they'll ever have. My time will come, and when it does, they'll learn why I never lost a fraud case in my entire career. Because unlike their victims, I'm not just gathering evidence, I'm becoming it. The accident that put me here wasn't an accident at all. That much becomes clearer with each passing day. Through half-closed eyelids, I watch Michael check his phone for the 100th time, his face illuminated by the screen's cold glow. He's waiting for someone, and I know exactly who it is. These evening visits have become a choreographed dance, and I've memorized every step. Right on schedule, the door whispers open. "Any changes?" Dr. Reynolds asks, his practiced concern masking something darker. I remember testifying alongside him in the Morrison case, watching him explain complex medical terms to the jury with smooth confidence. Now he's using that same expertise to plot my death. "The latest scans show no improvement," Michael responds, his voice carrying just the right note of disappointment. "What about the documentation we discussed?" The question hangs in the air like smoke, heavy with implication. Dr. Reynolds moves closer to my bed, checking monitors with professional efficiency. "I've updated her medical records to reflect the complications we discussed. A history of adverse reactions to certain medications, subtle signs of respiratory distress. All perfectly normal for long-term coma patients." Their voices drop lower, forcing me to focus intently on each word. "And these complications," Michael probes, "they're common enough not to raise suspicion?" Dr. Reynolds' laugh is soft but chilling. "In my expert medical opinion, given her condition, nobody would question it, especially with the proper documentation in place." The irony of their conversation isn't lost on me. 3 years ago, I prosecuted a case involving falsified medical records. Dr. Reynolds testified about how difficult it would be to manipulate hospital documentation systems. "The safeguards are extensive," he'd said under oath. "Falsifying records would require not just access, but intimate knowledge of medical protocols." Now I understand why he was so knowledgeable about the process. A noise in the hallway makes them pause. Night nurse Sarah's shoes squeak against the polished floor as she passes, a sound I've learned to recognize and appreciate. Her timing is impeccable, though they don't realize it. Each interruption makes them slightly more careless, more likely to overlook details. Claire's handling the financial arrangements, Michael continues once Sarah's footsteps fade. "The offshore accounts are set up, and the law firm's paperwork will be processed next week. Everything's falling into place." The pride in his voice makes my stomach turn. I remember hearing that same tone when he won his first major case, when we opened our firm together, when he proposed. Dr. Reynolds clears his throat. "Speaking of arrangements, my consultation fee..." Michael cuts him off smoothly. "Already. Taken care of. Check your Cayman account." More evidence for my mental file. Every transaction leaves a trace, something I learned prosecuting financial crimes. They think they're being careful, but their confidence makes them sloppy. The door opens again, and Claire's perfume reaches me before her voice does. The same scent she wore at my wedding, now tainted by betrayal. "The firm's partners are starting to ask questions," she says without preamble. "We need to move faster." "What kind of questions?" Michael's voice carries an edge of concern. "About the merger, documents, the transfer of her equity shares. Anderson's particularly interested in why we're restructuring the partnership agreement now." Claire's heels click against the floor as she paces. "I've held them off with excuses about estate planning, but they're not stupid." I feel a surge of satisfaction. "Anderson, my mentor from law school and now a senior partner, always had a nose for suspicious behavior. I'd helped him uncover 3 separate embezzlement schemes during my career. Now his instincts are working in my favor, even if he doesn't know it. The insurance company is being persistent too, Dr. Reynolds adds. Their investigator called again about the accident report. The tension in the room thickens. This is new information, and I force myself to remain perfectly still despite my interest. What did they want? Michael's attempt at casual inquiry fails to mask his concern. Details about the brake failure. Apparently, the manufacturer is disputing the mechanical report. They're sending their own investigator. Dr. Reynolds shifts his weight, making the floor creak. It could complicate things. I remember the night of the accident in fragments. The rain-slicked roads, the strange feeling in the brake pedal, the sudden loss of control. At the time, I'd blamed the weather, but now each detail takes on new significance. How many times had Michael insisted on using his trusted mechanic for my car's maintenance? "Handle the investigator," Michael snaps. "That's what I'm paying you for. Claire, accelerate the paperwork. Once everything's transferred, we move forward with the final phase. No more delays." Their voices fade as they discuss more details, but my mind is already racing ahead. The insurance investigation is an unexpected gift, a thread that could unravel their entire plan if pulled correctly. I just need to find a way to make sure those threads end up in the right hands. Sarah returns after they leave, checking my vitals with her usual care. Her hand lingers on my wrist slightly longer than necessary, and I feel something small and metallic slide beneath my finger. A pen, I realize. She's been documenting everything, just as I hoped. In the darkness of my hospital room, a plan begins to take shape. They think they're writing the end of my story, but they've only finished the preface. The real chapters are about to begin. Memories flood back like a relentless tide as I lie here in the darkness, each wave bringing new clarity to what I once dismissed as coincidence. The signs were there all along, scattered through 12 years of marriage like breadcrumbs in a dark forest. Now, with forced stillness as my companion, I'm finally following the trail. 6 months before the accident, Michael started asking unusual questions about the firm's partnership agreement. "We should update the succession planning," he'd said, over dinner, casual as commenting on the weather. "With the merger talks coming up, we need to protect our interests." I'd agreed, touched by what I thought was his concern for our future. Now I recognize it as the first move in his endgame. Claire's involvement became clearer in retrospect, too. My sister, the trusted confidant, started showing up at the office more frequently. "Just wanting to understand the business better," she'd claimed, spending hours reviewing our financial structures. I'd been proud of her interest, even mentored her through some basic corporate law. I was teaching her how to dismantle my life, piece by careful piece. The accident itself comes back in vivid flashes. It was raining that night, the kind of heavy Boston downpour that turns brake lights into blurry red stars. I was driving home late after closing a major fraud case, ironically another insurance scheme. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Dinner's waiting. Drive safe." Was that message deliberately timed? The road curved sharply, the brakes felt strange, and then nothing. A new nurse enters my room, breaking my reverie. Not Sarah. This one's movements are unfamiliar, less careful. Through barely open eyes, I watch her check my monitors with mechanical efficiency. "Dr. Reynolds asked me to adjust your medication," she announces to my supposedly unconscious form. My heart rate spikes internally, but I've learned to keep the monitor steady. This is new. This isn't part of the regular routine. The nurse, Stevens, according to her badge, reaches for my IV line. Just then, Sarah's voice cuts through, the room like a blade. "I'll handle Mrs. Winter's medication." Her tone is professional but firm. Dr. Chen left specific instructions about her care protocol. Stevens hesitates, hand still hovering near my IV. Dr. Reynolds specifically requested. Dr. Chen is her primary physician, Sarah interrupts. Any changes to Mrs. Winters' medication need to go through him first. Hospital policy. The tension in the room is palpable, even to someone supposedly comatose. Finally, Stevens withdraws her hand and leaves, her footsteps sharp with frustration. Sarah waits until the door closes before checking my IV. Don't worry, she whispers, though she thinks I can't hear. I've got your back. For the first time, I allow myself to hope. Sarah isn't just suspicious anymore, she's actively intervening. Another piece moves on my mental chessboard. Later that night, I hear Michael arguing with someone in the hallway. What do you mean, unauthorized personnel? His voice carries that dangerous edge I now recognize. Dr. Reynolds assured me the night staff was handled. There was a complication, Stevens replies, her voice nervous. The regular nurse, she wouldn't leave. Quoted hospital policy about primary physician authority. A pause, then. Should we try again tomorrow? No. Michael's response is sharp. No more attempts that might raise questions. We'll handle it. Differently. Their footsteps retreat, but their words linger in my mind. They just made their first serious mistake, creating a witness who might crack under pressure. The next morning brings another unexpected development. Mrs. Winters has a visitor, Sarah announces. Through my practiced stillness, I hear the familiar voice of Detective Lisa Martinez, the insurance investigator I'd worked with on numerous fraud cases. Just following up on some inconsistencies in the accident report, Martinez tells Michael, who arrived moments after being notified of her presence. Her tone is professional, but I know that tone. It's the same one she used when circling suspects in our joint investigations. The brake manufacturer's analysis raised some interesting questions. I can almost feel Michael's practiced smile. Detective, my wife's condition is very delicate. Perhaps we could discuss this in my office? But Martinez stands her ground. Another trait I always admired about her. Actually, I'd prefer to examine the scene. The hospital room might provide relevant context. For the next hour, I listen as Martinez asks pointed questions about the night of the accident. Each query is carefully crafted, designed to probe inconsistencies without revealing her suspicions. Michael's responses are smooth, but I notice tiny cracks in his performance, slight hesitations, minimal tells that only someone who knows him well would catch. One more thing, Martinez says as she prepares to leave. We'll need Dr. Reynolds to clarify some points about Mrs. Winters' initial emergency care. His preliminary report seems to conflict with the paramedics' documentation. Michael's sharp intake of breath is barely audible, but to me, it sounds like a thunderclap. I'm sure any discrepancies are merely clerical errors, he responds smoothly. I'll have his office contact you. After Martinez leaves, Michael makes a flurry of calls. We have a problem, he tells Claire. The insurance investigation is going deeper than expected. Martinez is involved. My sister's response is immediate and harsh. Martinez? The same one from the Robertson fraud case? She never lets go once she catches a scent. They're right to be worried. Martinez and I had worked together to crack the Robertson case, a complex insurance fraud that seemed perfect on the surface, but crumbled under her relentless investigation. Now she's unknowingly working to uncover the truth about my accident, and I wish I could smile at the poetry of it all. As night falls, I catalog my growing list of allies: Sarah, the vigilant nurse; Martinez, the determined investigator; Anderson, the suspicious partner. None of them know they're working together yet, but the threads of their separate investigations are starting to intertwine. My would-be murderers created what they thought was a perfect plan, but they forgot the first rule of criminal law. The more complex the conspiracy, the more points of potential failure. In the darkness, I focus on controlling my breathing, maintaining the illusion of dependency that has become my greatest weapon. Soon, very soon, all these separate threads will need to be pulled together. But timing is everything, and right now, my stillness is gathering a storm. The pieces of their plan are falling into place, but so are mine. Through the hospital room's artificial twilight, I listen as Michael paces, his footsteps betraying an anxiety his voice tries to hide. The merger documents are ready, he tells Claire over the phone. Once they're filed tomorrow, controlling interest in the firm transfers to me. The partners won't be able to block any decisions after that. My mind races through the implications. The merger. It was never about expanding the firm's presence in New York. It was about creating a mechanism to transfer control, to dilute the other partners' voting rights. I'd seen similar tactics in dozens of corporate fraud cases, but I never thought I'd see them used against my own firm. Sarah slips into the room during her rounds, her movements deliberately slow as she checks my vitals. I've learned to read her subtle signals. The way she adjusts my pillows means she has news to share. Once Michael steps out to continue his call, she whispers, "Detective Martinez left something for you." Her hands move efficiently, sliding, what feels like a small recording device beneath my pillow. "She said you'd know what to do with it when the time comes." Martinez. Of course she'd remember our old tactics from the insurance fraud cases we worked together. We always planted recording, devices in hospital rooms, catching conspirators in unguarded moments. Now she's giving me the same tool, though she doesn't know I'm conscious to appreciate it. The door opens again, and Dr. Reynolds enters with another doctor I don't recognize. "This is Dr. Patterson," Reynolds announces to Michael, who's returned from his call. "He's joining our team to assist with managing complications." "Pleasure." Dr. Patterson's voice carries an accent, Eastern European, maybe Russian. "I've reviewed the case. Very unfortunate, these coma complications. They can be so unpredictable." The emphasis he places on the last word sends a chill through me. Another player in their deadly game. Michael clears his throat. "Dr. Patterson has experience with cases like this," he explains, the implied meaning heavy in his voice. "His expertise will be invaluable during the recovery attempt. I remember a case from 3 years ago, a string of suspicious deaths in a Chicago hospital, all during recovery attempts from various conditions. The doctor responsible was never caught, but the pattern was clear enough to warrant an FBI investigation. Could this be the same person, now operating under a new name? Their conversation shifts to technical medical terms, but I catch the underlying message. They're planning something specific, something soon. Dr. Patterson discusses potential complications, air embolisms, medication reactions, respiratory failure. Each possibility is presented as a natural, unfortunate outcome of coma recovery. A noise in the hallway makes them pause. Through my barely open eyes, I see Anderson, my senior partner, standing in the doorway. His expression is carefully neutral, but I know that look. It's the same one he wore when we were closing in on suspects in court. "Michael," Anderson's voice is measured. "The partners are calling an emergency meeting. Now. There are some concerning irregularities in the merger documentation." He glances at the doctors, then back to Michael, "and we need to discuss the recent changes to Catherine's equity arrangement." Michael's composure slips for just a moment. "Thomas, this isn't a good time. The doctors are..." "Now, Michael." Anderson's tone leaves no room for argument. "Dr. Reynolds, I'm sure you understand that firm business requires immediate attention." After they leave, Dr. Patterson mutters something in Russian to Reynolds. I catch enough to understand. My years of working international fraud cases included learning several languages. He's suggesting they proceed tonight, regardless of the firm's interference. Sarah returns after the doctors leave, this time with another nurse, Angela, who I recognize from the day shift. "Everything's documented," Angela whispers. The unauthorized medication orders, the unscheduled visits, the inconsistencies in the charts. We've been keeping records since Sarah first noticed something wrong. My mind races with this new information. The nurses have been building their own case, creating an independent record of suspicious activity, another thread in the web of evidence being woven around my would-be killers. Later that night, I hear Claire arguing with Michael in the hallway. "The partners are asking too many questions," she hisses. "Anderson's been going through the old case files, the ones about medical fraud and insurance scams. He's making connections." "It doesn't matter." Michael's voice is strained. "Once the merger goes through tomorrow, it matters if he takes this to the SEC, Claire interrupts. "Or have you forgotten that little detail about the offshore accounts? The partners aren't stupid, Michael. They're lawyers who specialize in uncovering fraud." Their argument is interrupted by the arrival of Detective Martinez. "Mr. Winters." Her voice carries that familiar note of professional courtesy, masking suspicion. "Just got the final report from the brake manufacturer. Fascinating reading. Mind if we go over some details?" I can almost hear Michael's forced smile. "Detective, it's quite late." "It won't take long," Martinez continues smoothly. "Just need to clarify a few points about the maintenance records. And perhaps Dr. Reynolds could join us? There seem to be some interesting overlaps in the timing of certain events." The tension in the room is palpable. Through my practiced stillness, I'm cataloging every word, every reaction. Martinez is tightening the noose. Anderson is pulling at the financial threads, and the nurses are documenting everything. All the separate investigations are converging, creating a perfect storm of evidence. But I know my husband. When cornered, Michael doesn't retreat. He attacks. And Dr. Patterson's presence suggests they're preparing for something drastic. Tonight will be crucial. The recording device beneath my pillow feels like a ticking bomb, waiting to capture whatever they're planning. As the night shift begins, I focus on keeping my breathing steady, my monitors consistent. Years of prosecuting complex fraud cases taught me that timing is everything. The evidence is mounting, the witnesses are in place, and soon, very soon, I'll spring the trap that they unknowingly helped me build. The night shift brings an unexpected gift, a mistake born of desperation. Michael returns from the partners' meeting looking shaken, his usual composure cracking at the edges. "Everything's falling apart," he snaps at Claire, forgetting to keep his voice down. Anderson's blocked the merger filing. He's demanding a full audit of the firm's accounts, including the offshore transfers. Claire's sharp intake of breath tells me everything. He can't do that. The Cayman accounts are linked to the firm's legitimate business accounts. I know. Michael's voice rises dangerously. Reynolds' consulting fees, Patterson's retainer, the maintenance garage payments. It's all there if someone knows where to look. And Anderson knows exactly where to look. A surge of satisfaction flows through me. Anderson, my mentor and friend, is doing exactly what I taught him during our years of prosecuting financial crimes together. Follow the money, trace the connections, and watch the whole house of cards collapse. Dr. Patterson enters the room, his footsteps heavy with urgency. "We have a problem," he announces without preamble. "The Chicago investigation. They've reopened it. Someone made the connection to my work here." "What investigation?" Claire demands. But I already know. The string of suspicious hospital deaths I'd suspected him of being involved with. Someone else has finally connected those dots. It doesn't matter, Michael cuts in. We need to move forward, tonight. No more delays, no more perfect planning. If we wait any longer, everything unravels. The monitors beside my bed beep steadily as I maintain my practiced calm. The recording device beneath my pillow captures every word of their desperation. They're making mistakes now, speaking openly, about things they should keep hidden. Fear does that to people. I've seen it countless times in court. The nurses are suspicious, Dr. Reynolds adds, joining their crisis meeting. They're documenting everything. I caught Sarah making copies of Catherine's charts, the originals, not my modified versions. Michael swears softly. Handle it. I don't care how, just... No. Reynolds's refusal is sharp. I'm not adding assault or intimidation charges to potential fraud and murder accusations. The nurses aren't part of our agreement. Their facade of professional conspiracy is crumbling, revealing the frightened criminals beneath. I've seen this pattern before. Under pressure, conspirators always turn on each other. It's just happening faster than I expected. Sarah enters the room, interrupting their debate. Her presence forces them to retreat into their roles, the concerned husband, the devoted sister, the attentive doctors. But I notice she's not alone. Angela shadows her, both nurses moving with deliberate efficiency as they check my vitals. Detective Martinez was asking about Dr. Patterson's credentials, Sarah mentions casually, her voice carrying just enough volume to be heard. Apparently, there are some inconsistencies with his medical license registration. The effect is immediate. Patterson mutters something in Russian, a curse I recognize from my international cases, and Reynolds visibly tenses. Michael's attempt to maintain control sounds hollow. I'm sure it's just a clerical error. These administrative details can be so complex? Of course, Angela agrees smoothly. Just like those complicated insurance forms and hospital records, Detective Martinez was very interested in those too. Such strange discrepancies in the documentation. They're playing their part perfectly, these nurses who've become my silent guardians. Each casual comment is a carefully placed dart, designed to increase the pressure on my would-be killers. After the nurses leave, the conspirators' discussion becomes more frantic. Patterson's credentials won't hold up to serious scrutiny, Reynolds warns. If Martinez starts digging, then we finish this now, Michael interrupts. Tonight, during the shift change, we can't wait for the perfect moment anymore. Claire's objection is immediate. The nurses will be busy with shift turnover, Michael's voice hardens. Patterson knows what to do. A simple complication during recovery. Natural, untraceable, and most importantly, final. Their words send a chill through me, but not of fear. Everything is falling into place. Their desperation, their mistakes, their hasty planning. The recording device catches it all, building an audio portrait of conspiracy and murder. Through my barely open eyes, I watch them lay out their final plan. Patterson will create a medical emergency during the shift change when the regular nurses are busy with handover. Reynolds will provide the official explanation, a tragic complication during attempted recovery. Michael and Claire will play their roles as grieving husband and sister, while the firm's merger remains blocked and Anderson's audit looms over them. They think they're choosing the perfect moment, but they don't realize they're walking into a trap. Sarah and Angela have already alerted Martinez about tonight's shift change. I heard them discussing it earlier. Anderson's audit has frozen the offshore accounts, though they don't know that yet. And the recording device beneath my pillow captures every detail of their hastily planned crime. As they leave to prepare, Michael's hand brushes against mine one last time. The touch that once meant love now feels like a confessor's fingerprint, marking him for the justice to come. In a few hours, they'll return for what they think is their final act. But the ending they've planned isn't the one they're going to get. Years of prosecuting complex frauds taught me that the most dangerous moment is when criminals think they're about to succeed. That's when they make the mistakes that bring them down. Tonight, all the pieces will come together. Martinez's investigation, Anderson's audit, the nurse's documentation, and my own silent witness. They thought they chose the perfect victim, but instead, they've given me the perfect case. The ventilator hisses rhythmically beside my bed, but beneath that sound, I'm counting down the minutes. Soon, very soon, they'll discover that the trap they thought they set for me has become their own. The shift change approaches like an oncoming storm. I can feel the tension building in every footstep that passes my door, every whispered conversation, every subtle preparation. Sarah makes her final rounds, her movements deliberate as she checks my vitals one last time before handover. "Everything's in place," she whispers, adjusting my pillows. "Detective Martinez has people stationed throughout the floor. Dr. Chen's been notified about any potential recovery attempts." Her fingers brush against the recording device, ensuring it's still perfectly positioned. The pieces of my counter strategy click into place like tumblers in a lock. I think about all the fraud cases I've prosecuted, how often the crucial moment came down to timing and documentation. Now I'm not just gathering evidence, I'm becoming it. Michael returns earlier than usual, his expensive cologne failing to mask the smell of scotch. The partners' meeting must have gone worse than expected. "Claire's delayed at the firm," he tells Dr. Patterson, who materializes like a shadow in the doorway. "Anderson's called in the SEC. They're seizing documents, freezing accounts." Patterson's response comes in rapid-fire Russian, which I understand perfectly, another fact they don't know about me. He's arguing for immediate action, saying they can't wait for Claire. The words Chicago investigation and extradition feature prominently in his concerns. "Stick to the plan," Michael snaps, switching to English. During shift change, Reynolds has the documentation ready to explain everything. His voice carries that dangerous edge I've learned to recognize, the tone that means he's about to do something reckless. Dr. Reynolds arrives next, completing their deadly trio. "The charts are prepared," he announces, his professional manner cracking slightly. "Everything points to a natural complication during recovery. But we need to discuss Patterson's involvement. If there's an investigation, there won't be an investigation," Michael interrupts. "By tomorrow morning, Catherine will have succumbed to unfortunate but completely natural complications. The merger documents will be filed first thing, transferring control of the firm. The offshore accounts will be cleared before Anderson's audit can touch them. This ends tonight." Through my practiced stillness, I note every detail of their final planning. Patterson will create the medical emergency. Something about air in my IV line. Reynolds will document the failed recovery attempt. Michael will play the grieving husband, while Claire handles the firm's paperwork in the morning. They think they've considered everything, but they haven't considered me. A commotion in the hallway draws their attention. Anderson's voice carries clearly through the door. "As senior partner, I'm instructing hospital security that no changes to Catherine Winter's care are to be implemented without Dr. Chen's direct approval." Michael moves quickly to intercept him. "Thomas, this isn't the time." "Actually," Detective Martinez's voice joins the conversation, "this is exactly the time. Dr. Patterson, would you join us? There are some questions about your medical credentials that need immediate attention." The room crackles with tension. Patterson looks to Reynolds, who takes an involuntary step back. The perfect plan is unraveling thread by thread, and I can almost see the moment each conspirator realizes it. "This is ridiculous," Michael attempts to regain control. "My wife needs specialized care." "Your wife needs protection," Anderson interrupts, entering the room with Martinez. "From you, as it turns out. The SEC has some fascinating questions about certain offshore transfers coinciding with her accident." Martinez moves with practiced efficiency, positioning herself between Patterson and my bed. "Dr. Patterson, or should I say Mr. Petrov, Interpol is particularly interested in your work in Chicago, and Prague, and Moscow." Patterson's composure breaks. He makes a move toward the door, but hospital security is already there. In the chaos that follows, I hear multiple voices overlapping. Officers reading rights, security restraining Patterson, Reynolds attempting to explain away his involvement. Michael's last attempt at control sounds hollow. "This is all a misunderstanding, is it?" Claire's voice cuts through the room, surprising everyone. She stands in the doorway looking pale but determined. Like the misunderstanding about the brake lines on her car? Or the misunderstanding about the offshore accounts? I can't do this anymore, Michael. I won't let you kill my sister. The recording device beneath my pillow captures everything. Claire's confession, Michael's sharp intake of breath, Martinez reading him his rights. It's all evidence, all part of the case I've built from my bed of supposed helplessness. The nurses documented everything, Claire continues, her voice shaking. Every suspicious order, every unauthorized visit. Sarah showed me the files. Catherine taught me how to build fraud cases. And you made me help destroy her through. Barely open eyes, I watch my husband's perfect facade finally shatter. The composed lawyer, the mastermind of this elaborate plot, crumbles into the desperate criminal he really is. Check her IV line, Sarah's voice rings out clearly. Dr. Patterson was near it earlier. Dr. Chen, my actual physician, moves quickly to examine the IV. Air bubbles, he announces. They were already starting their attempt. It's time. As they handcuff Michael, as Patterson and Reynolds are led away, as Claire breaks down in Anderson's paternal embrace, I finally let my eyes open fully. The room goes silent as I turn my head slightly, a movement that sends shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Hello, Michael, I say clearly, my voice rough from disuse but gaining strength. I believe the word you're looking for is gotcha. The chaos that follows my revelation is almost theatrical in its intensity. Michael's face drains of color, his carefully maintained composure shattering like fine crystal. How long? He manages to stammer, his lawyer's eloquence deserting him at last. Long enough to hear everything, I reply, my voice growing stronger with each word. Every plan, every scheme, every betrayal. You really should be more careful what you discuss in front of a supposedly comatose person. The irony of the situation isn't lost on anyone in the room. The expert fraud prosecutor, playing possum while building her biggest case yet. Detective Martinez moves with efficient precision, making sure Michael's handcuffs are secure. Mrs. Winters, I believe you have something for me? She asks, nodding toward my pillow. I smile slightly as Sarah retrieves the recording device. Hours of documented conspiracy, caught in perfect digital clarity. The nurses have been keeping their own records as well, Martinez continues, nodding to Sarah and Angela. Very detailed records. It's amazing how much suspicious activity they noticed once they started looking. Dr. Chen quickly examines me, his professional demeanor barely masking his amazement. Your recovery? You've been conscious this entire time? The question carries layers of implications, medical, legal, and personal. Conscious and cataloging, I confirm. Though I have to admit, the ventilator dependency was a performance. I hope you'll forgive the deception, doctor, but it was necessary to maintain the illusion. Anderson steps forward, legal pad already in hand. Catherine, the SEC is waiting to take your statement about the offshore accounts and the merger scheme. And the Bar Association will want to— Thomas, I interrupt gently. Let's give Detective Martinez first crack at the criminal charges. Securities fraud can wait until we deal with the attempted murder. Claire stands in the corner, tears streaming down her face. The sight of my sister, her betrayal and eventual confession, brings a complex mix of emotions. Come here, I say, softly. She approaches cautiously as if expecting rejection. I'm so sorry, she whispers. When he first approached me about the firm's succession planning, it seemed reasonable. Then it was the offshore accounts, then the accident. It spiraled so fast. When I realized he actually meant to kill you, that's why you came forward tonight, I deduce. You knew about their plan for shift change. She nods, wiping her eyes. Sarah showed me the nurse's documentation. Seeing it all laid out like that, so clinical and precise, just like you taught me to build cases. I couldn't be part of it anymore. Dr. Patterson and Reynolds are led, away in handcuffs, their professional facades completely crumbled. Patterson's muttered Russian curses are cut short as Martinez's officers escort him out. Reynolds attempts one last justification. The hospital administration approved all my documentation. The falsified documentation, Dr. Chen corrects sharply, which, by the way, contradicted the nurse's original notes. Did you really think no one would check? Michael makes his last desperate play, his lawyer's instincts surfacing even in defeat. Catherine, think about this. Any statement you make now could be questioned. You've been through trauma. You're on medication. Nice try, counselor, Martinez interrupts. But Mrs. Winters has multiple witnesses corroborating her story, extensive documentation, and your own recorded confession. Not to mention the physical evidence from her car's brake lines, the offshore account records, and Dr. Patterson's interesting international history. I watch as the full weight of his situation finally hits Michael. Every careful plan, every calculated move has been turned against him. The prosecutor he tried to silence has built an airtight case from her hospital bed. The merger documents, he says suddenly. You can't prove. Actually, Anderson interjects, the SEC has already frozen all related transactions. And Claire's testimony about the offshore accounts gives us everything we need. The firm will survive, Michael. It just won't be yours. Sarah begins adjusting my bed, helping me sit up properly for the first time in weeks. The movement draws everyone's attention, a physical representation of my shift from silent witness to active prosecutor. You know what your mistake was, Michael? I ask, my voice gaining strength. You forgot who I am. You spent 15 years watching me build cases against people exactly like you. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize the signs? That I wouldn't know exactly what evidence to gather? Detective Martinez pulls out her notebook. Mrs. Winters, whenever you're ready, I'd like to take your formal statement. Starting with the brake tampering, then moving on to the conspiracy charges. Actually, I reply, let's begin with Dr. Patterson's involvement. I think his connection to the Chicago hospital deaths will interest Interpol. I notice Patterson's sharp look of surprise. Yes, doctor. I understand Russian. That's another detail they overlooked. The room slowly clears as various officers escort the conspirators away. Claire remains, supervised by an officer, ready to give her own statement. Anderson begins coordinating with the SEC investigators, while Dr. Chen supervises my official medical assessment. Sarah stays by my side, her steady presence a reminder of how crucial her role was. We knew something was wrong, she tells me. The inconsistencies in the charts, the late-night visits, Dr. Reynolds's unusual orders. But we never imagined. You did exactly the right thing, I assure her. Document everything, stay vigilant, protect your patient. You're the reason I'm alive. As the initial chaos subsides, Martinez returns to my bedside. You know, Catherine, in all my years investigating insurance fraud, I've never seen anything quite like this. A prosecutor building a case from her own hospital bed while the perpetrators thought she was comatose. It's ironic, I suggest. They gave me the perfect observation post. Every piece of evidence, every incriminating conversation delivered right to me. They thought they were writing my ending, but they were actually dictating their own confessions. The weight of the past weeks begins to settle over me, but there's more work to be done. Statements to give, evidence to process, a law firm to stabilize, and a long road of recovery ahead. But as I look around the room at the allies who helped bring down this conspiracy, Sarah, Martinez, Anderson, even my repentant sister, I know that the hardest part is over. You should rest, Dr. Chen suggests, noting my fatigue. The investigators can come back tomorrow. I shake my head slightly. Not yet. Let's get the preliminary statements done now, while everything's fresh. After all, I add with a small smile, I've been resting for weeks. It's time to get back to work. The days following the arrests unfold like a complex legal thriller, one where I'm both the star witness and the prosecutor preparing the case. My hospital room transforms into an impromptu command center with a steady stream of investigators, SEC agents, and legal professionals cycling through. The scope of the conspiracy is still expanding, Martinez tells me, spreading files across my adjustable bed tray. Dr. Patterson, or Petrov, rather, is connected to similar cases in 3 countries. Interpol's been building a file on him for years, but he always stayed one step ahead. Until now. I scan the documents with practiced efficiency, my legal mind quickly connecting new dots. These other hospital deaths, they all followed the same pattern. Patients in long-term care, unexpected complications during recovery, substantial insurance payouts. A thought strikes me. Check the insurance company's legal representation. I bet you'll find connections to Michael's old firm in New York. Martinez makes a note, nodding appreciatively. Already on it, the SEC's investigation into the offshore accounts is revealing an entire network. Your husband wasn't just planning your murder. He was setting up a long-term operation. Using my firm as a front, I add, the pieces clicking into place. The merger wasn't just about gaining control. It was about establishing a legitimate channel for processing insurance, settlements from Patterson's future victims. The realization makes my blood run cold. I wasn't just a target. I was a test case. Sarah enters with my afternoon medication, her role now expanded to include coordinating with hospital security. Dr. Reynolds is cooperating with the investigation, she reports. He's offering details about other cases where he helped falsify medical records. Of course he is, I reply unsurprised. Reynolds was always the weak link. His expertise made him valuable, but his conscience made him vulnerable. I'd seen it in his hesitation, his growing discomfort as the plan progressed. Anderson arrives. Next, bringing updates from the firm. The SEC has frozen all suspicious transactions, he reports. We're stabilizing client relationships, but there's something else you need to see. He hands me a file. We found these in Michael's private office safe. Inside are documents dating back 3 years, preliminary plans for what would become my attempted murder. Bank statements, insurance policies, even preliminary contacts with Patterson. He was planning this before we even opened the Boston office, I realize, the betrayal cutting deeper. There's more, Anderson continues. Remember the Robertson insurance fraud case you prosecuted last year? The one that seemed too easy to crack? I nod, already seeing where this is heading. Michael deliberately sabotaged their coverage. He was studying how you built cases, learning what to avoid. The irony would be almost admirable if it wasn't so chilling. My own investigative techniques, carefully observed and documented, used to plan what they thought would be the perfect crime. He learned the wrong lesson, I observe. Instead of seeing how to commit the perfect murder, he should have learned that there's no such thing. Claire's cooperation proves invaluable as the case builds. Her testimony reveals the gradual evolution of the conspiracy, how Michael manipulated her, using her admiration for my legal career to draw her into his scheme. He said we were protecting you at first, she explains during a recorded statement. Making sure your assets were secure. Then it became about the firm's future, then about insurance planning. By the time I realized where it was heading, I felt trapped. Martinez's team uncovers more evidence daily. The mechanic who tampered with my car brakes confesses, providing documentation of payments traced back to one of Michael's offshore accounts. The hospital's IT department discovers unauthorized access to my medical records, time-stamped to months before my accident. They created a trail of pre-existing conditions, Dr. Chen explains, reviewing the falsified records. Setting up medical justification for potential complications. Very sophisticated. We might never have caught it if the nurses hadn't maintained their own independent documentation. Sarah and Angela receive commendations from the hospital board for their vigilance. We just followed protocol, Sarah insists modestly. Document everything, verify orders, protect the patient. Catherine's the one who turned it into a case. The international implications expand as Patterson's true identity unravels. Interpol connects him to suspicious deaths in hospitals across Europe and Asia. He was building a network, Martinez explains, using law firms like yours to process insurance claims, creating a legitimate front for what amounts to medical murder for hire. My physical recovery progresses alongside the investigation. Each day brings more strength, more clarity, and more determination to see justice served. The ventilator is removed, replaced by the steady rhythm of my own breathing. My voice grows stronger, ready for the testimony to come. Michael attempts one last manipulation from jail, sending a letter filled with explanations and apologies. He claims he was protecting me. I tell Martinez, handing over the unopened envelope. Says I'll understand if I just let him explain. The letter joins the evidence file, another piece in the prosecution's case. Late one evening, as the hospital quiets and the day's parade of investigators ends, Anderson stays behind. The firm's clients are rallying behind us, he reports. Your reputation, your history of fighting fraud, it's becoming a symbol. The press is already calling it the prosecutor's revenge. I shake my head at the dramatization. This wasn't about revenge, Thomas. It was about justice. About using their own methods to expose not just my attempted murder, but an entire criminal enterprise. Still, he muses, you have to appreciate the poetry of it. They gave their star witness front row, seats to their own conspiracy. As night falls over Boston, I review the case files spread across my hospital bed. Each document, each piece of evidence, represents a thread in the web they wove, a web that ultimately caught its creators. Tomorrow will bring more depositions, more evidence processing, more steps toward justice. You should rest, Sarah advises during her final check. The prosecutors can wait. I smile, thinking of all the nights I spent silently gathering evidence. I've done enough resting. Right now we have work to do. The trial preparations reveal layers of betrayal I never imagined possible. As I sit in the conference room of the district attorney's office, my first day out of the hospital, each new piece of evidence hits like a physical blow. Detective Martinez spreads photos across the table, surveillance images dating back months before my accident. They were watching you for weeks, she explains, laying out the timeline, tracking your routines, noting when you worked late, monitoring your driving patterns. The level of premeditation is staggering. I pick up a photo of myself leaving the courthouse after winning the Robertson case. In the background, barely noticeable, stands Dr. Patterson. He was there, I realize, studying his future crime scene, learning the hospital's layout, the staff schedules, everything he'd need to know. The district attorney, Helen Crawford, nods grimly. Patterson's confession is extraordinary. Once Interpol confirmed his identity, he started talking, trying to bargain his way out of extradition. The network he describes, it's like a medical murder-for-hire service for wealthy clients. With law firms handling the legitimate end, I add, thinking of all the insurance cases I've prosecuted. Processing claims, managing settlements, providing legal cover. How many other firms were involved? We're still uncovering connections, Martinez says. The SEC investigation has identified similar patterns in at least 3 other major cities. Your firm would have been their East Coast hub. The scope of what I narrowly escaped becomes clearer with each revelation. Michael hadn't just planned my murder. He was attempting to join an international criminal enterprise. I would have been his proof of concept, his demonstration that he could handle the legal end of their operation. Sarah visits during a break. In the preparation, bringing updates from the hospital investigation. Dr. Reynolds is still cooperating, she reports. He's identified 7 other cases where Patterson approached him about falsifying records. 2 of them were at our hospital. Were any successful? I ask, dreading the answer. No, she assures me. But not for lack of trying. Your documentation requirements for the fraud cases you prosecuted, they actually helped us identify suspicious patterns in medical records. The protocols you established saved lives without you even knowing it. The irony isn't lost on me. My own professional paranoia, my insistence on detailed documentation, had created safeguards that helped protect others from the fate intended. For me, Claire's testimony preparation is particularly difficult to watch. My sister breaks down repeatedly as she details how Michael gradually drew her into the conspiracy. He started with small things, she explains, her voice shaking, asking me to review insurance documents, suggesting changes to your will. He said it was all standard estate planning, protecting your interests. When did you realize it wasn't? Crawford asks gently. After the accident, when he started talking about complications during recovery. The way he discussed it was so clinical. That's when I understood he'd planned everything, that the accident wasn't an accident at all. Anderson brings updates from the firm's internal investigation. We've identified all the compromised accounts, he reports. The merger would have given them access to our entire client list, our insurance contacts, everything they needed to expand their operation. And the offshore accounts? I ask, though I already suspect the answer. Connected to similar operations in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Miami. The SEC has frozen everything. They're calling it one of the largest insurance fraud conspiracies they've ever uncovered. Michael's defense team makes their expected moves, attempting to suppress evidence, challenging my testimony's credibility, suggesting that my coma might have affected my memory. Crawford handles each motion with practiced skill. They're desperate, she assures me. The recording device caught everything. Your nurse's documentation is impeccable. And now we have Claire's testimony, Reynolds's confession, and Patterson, spilling international secrets to avoid extradition. This case is solid. Yet something still bothers me. During a review of the evidence, I notice a pattern in the financial records. These transfers, I point out to Martinez, they don't match Michael's usual methods. Someone else was advising him, someone with experience in this kind of operation. Martinez leans in, studying the transactions. You think there's another player we haven't identified? Someone had to recruit Michael into this network, I reason. Someone who knew about his ambitions, his financial pressures, his connection to my fraud prosecutions. Someone who could see how useful he'd be to their operation. The investigation takes a new turn as we follow this thread. Records from Michael's old firm in New York reveal communications with a senior partner named Victor Lawrence. The name strikes a chord. I'd investigated him years ago for insurance fraud, but couldn't prove anything. Lawrence disappeared 6 months ago, Martinez reports, right after the first transfers to Patterson's accounts. But look at this. He handled legal work for 3 hospitals where suspicious deaths occurred. He was their recruiter, I realize, finding lawyers who could be compromised, who had access to the right kinds of cases. Michael wasn't just joining their operation, he was being groomed to replace Lawrence. The revelation adds another dimension to the case. Crawford adjusts the prosecution strategy, focusing not just on the attempt on my life, but on the larger criminal enterprise it was meant to serve. Late one night, reviewing case files in my home office, finally cleared by security teams, I find a photo from a firm event 3 years ago. In it, Michael stands with Lawrence, both smiling at the camera. I remember that night clearly. Lawrence had congratulated me on my prosecution record, had seemed genuinely interested in my methods. He was studying me too, I tell Martinez the next day. Learning how I built cases, probably sharing that information with their network. They wanted to kill me not just for the insurance money, but because I was getting too good at spotting their schemes. The trial date is set, and as the final preparations begin, I can't help but appreciate the completeness of their failure. They tried to silence me, but instead gave me the perfect vantage point to expose their entire operation. Every detail. I memorized every conversation I overheard, every pattern I recognized. It all comes together to form an airtight case. You know, Crawford remarks during our final preparation session, in all my years as a prosecutor, I've never seen anything quite like this. The star witness gathering evidence from her hospital bed, turning their own methods against them. It's justice, I finish for her. Sometimes it comes in unexpected ways. As I prepare to face Michael in court, to testify about everything I witnessed during those silent weeks, I think about all the cases I've prosecuted. None of them prepared me for becoming the key witness in my own attempted murder investigation. But then again, none of their perpetrators prepared for their victim to be a prosecutor who specialized in unraveling exactly these kinds of schemes. The courtroom falls silent as I take the witness stand. After months of preparation, countless hours of evidence review, and the unraveling of an international conspiracy, this moment feels almost surreal. Michael sits at the defense table, his expensive suit now hanging loose on his frame, his composed facade cracking under the weight of the prosecution's evidence. Please state your name for the record, Crawford begins, her voice steady and professional. This is more than just another trial. It's the culmination of everything we've uncovered, every thread we've pulled, every layer of deception we've exposed. Catherine Winters, I respond clearly, my voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom. Senior partner at Winters & Shaw, specializing in insurance fraud prosecution. The irony of my title isn't lost on anyone present. The evidence unfolds like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Crawford leads me through the timeline, the suspicious changes to my will, the altered medical directives, the offshore account transfers. Each piece connects to the next, forming a picture of breathtaking criminality. And you were conscious during these conversations? Crawford asks, approaching a crucial point. Yes, I confirm. Unable to move, but fully aware. I heard every plan, every detail, every discussion of how they intended to end my life. My eyes meet Michael's briefly. His mask of indifference slips, showing a flash of the desperation beneath. The recording device's contents play through the courtroom speakers. Michael's voice, discussing my death with clinical detachment. Patterson outlining the perfect medical complication. Reynolds explaining how he'd falsify the records. Claire's initial compliance and eventual breakdown. Your Honor, Michael's defense attorney interrupts. We contest the admissibility of these recordings. My client's right to privacy was forfeited, Judge Henderson responds firmly, when he chose to discuss murder plans in a hospital room. Proceed, Ms. Crawford. Sarah testifies next, her nursing expertise lending crucial credibility to the timeline. She describes the documentation system she and Angela developed, their growing suspicions, the careful notes they kept of every suspicious interaction. The nurses' records were crucial, Detective Martinez adds during her testimony. They provided independent verification of everything Mrs. Winters overheard. Their documentation revealed patterns that connected to similar cases in other hospitals. Dr. Patterson's video deposition plays next, his confession outlining the entire criminal enterprise. He details how Victor Lawrence recruited lawyers from prestigious firms, how they identified potential targets, how they processed millions in fraudulent insurance claims through seemingly legitimate channels. The defendant wasn't just planning murder, Crawford explains to the jury. He was auditioning for a role in an international criminal organization. Mrs. Winters wasn't just a target, she was his proof of concept. Anderson's testimony about the firm's finances draws gasps from the gallery. The scope of the planned fraud, the complexity of the offshore accounts, the careful groundwork laid over years. It paints a picture of methodical, calculated criminality, The merger documents were particularly damning, he explains, displaying financial records on the courtroom screens. They would have given them control not just of Mrs. Winter's assets, but of the firm's entire client list. The perfect foundation for expanding their operation. Claire's testimony proves devastating to Michael's defense. My sister's voice shakes as she describes how he manipulated her, used her admiration for my career to draw her into his schemes. He said we were protecting Catherine, she explains. By the time I understood his real plans, I felt trapped. But I couldn't. I couldn't let him kill my sister. The defense attempts to paint me as confused, my memories clouded by trauma and medication. Dr. Chen's testimony demolishes this strategy, providing medical evidence of my consciousness and awareness during the entire period. Mrs. Winter's condition was unique, he explains. She maintained complete cognitive function while appearing comatose. Every detail she recalls is supported by medical documentation, nurse observations, and independent evidence. As the trial progresses, more connections emerge. Victor Lawrence's network begins to unravel as other lawyers come forward, seeking deals before they're exposed. The SEC investigation expands, uncovering similar operations in cities across the country. Michael's facade finally cracks during cross-examination. Crawford's questions about Lawrence, about the broader conspiracy, about his long-term plans, chip away at his composure until he snaps. "She was getting too close," he shouts, his careful control deserting him. The Robertson case, the insurance, investigations, she would have uncovered everything. Lawrence said she had to be stopped. It was her or the entire operation. The courtroom erupts in chaos at this outburst. His defense attorney slumps in defeat, knowing their case is lost. Judge Henderson calls for order as Michael realizes what he's admitted, but it's too late. The jury deliberates for less than 4 hours. The verdict, when it comes, is unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, racketeering. The sentence reflects the magnitude of the crimes. Life imprisonment without possibility of parole. After the verdict, Martinez updates me on the international implications. Interpol's dismantling Lawrence's entire network, arrests across 3 continents. Your case broke open one of the largest medical fraud conspiracies in history. Standing outside the courthouse, facing a wall of reporters, I think about the irony of it all. Justice, I tell them, sometimes comes in unexpected ways. They gave their star witness a front-row seat to their own conspiracy, never realizing that every word they spoke was building the case against them. Later that evening, in my office at the firm, Anderson brings me the final paperwork. The merger is officially dead, the offshore accounts seized, the conspiracy exposed. "What now?" he asks. I look at the case files spread across my desk, the Robertson case that first put me on their radar, the evidence that accumulated during my hospital stay, the international web we uncovered. "Now," I reply, "we make sure this never happens again. We create new protocols, better safeguards. We use what we've learned to protect others." Sarah visits me at the office, no longer in her nurse's uniform, but still carrying that air of protective vigilance. "The hospital's implementing new monitoring procedures," she tells me. "Your case is becoming a template for patient protection." The BAO story makes headlines across the country. Prosecutor turns near-death experience into career-defining case. But for me, it's more than just another victory in court. It's a reminder that justice finds its way to the truth, even through the most unlikely channels. As night falls over Boston, I stand at my office window, watching the city lights flicker to life. The conspiracy that nearly killed me has been exposed, its architects facing justice, their elaborate plans dismantled. They thought they were writing my ending, but instead, they wrote their own. 6 months after the verdict, the ripple effects of the case continue to spread through the legal and medical communities. I stand in my newly renovated office at Winters, and Shaw, now simply Shaw Legal after a much-needed rebranding, reviewing the latest updates from Interpol's ongoing investigation. They found Victor Lawrence, Detective Martinez announces, striding into my office without preamble. She drops a file on my desk, revealing surveillance photos from Argentina. Living under an alias, but not nearly as carefully as he should. Have been. His arrest this morning brings down the last major player in the network. I study the photos, remembering the man who'd seemed so interested in my prosecution methods years ago. How many confirmed cases are we looking at now? 37. Attempted murders across 12 countries, she replies, settling into a chair. 23 successful. Over 200 million in fraudulent insurance claims. Your case broke open what Interpol's calling the largest organized medical fraud conspiracy they've ever seen. The numbers still stagger me, even after months of revelations. Each case represents someone like me, targeted, vulnerable, seen as nothing more than a means to profit. But unlike me, many of them didn't survive to see justice done. Sarah visits regularly, though she's no longer just a nurse. The hospital promoted her to Director of Patient Safety, implementing new protocols based on our experience. We're rolling out the documentation system nationally, she tells me over coffee. Every suspicious pattern, every unauthorized change, in care, every unusual visitor. It all gets logged and cross-referenced now. The system is already proving its worth. 3 attempts at similar schemes have been caught in other hospitals, the perpetrators identified before they could harm their intended victims. Each case validates the vigilance that saved my life. Claire's path to redemption continues, though our relationship remains complicated. She's working with the FBI now, her insider knowledge of the conspiracy helping to identify potential targets and prevent similar schemes. Another law firm flagged suspicious merger documents today, she reports during our weekly lunch. Same. Pattern, controlling interest transfers, offshore accounts, connections to specific hospitals. Forward it to Crawford, I instruct, thinking of the district attorney who so skillfully prosecuted my case. She's building a task force specifically for these types of conspiracies. The task force is my brainchild, born from the realization that traditional law enforcement isn't equipped to handle the complexity of medical legal fraud conspiracies. We bring together prosecutors, medical professionals, insurance investigators, and financial experts, all trained to recognize the patterns. We uncovered. Anderson, now managing partner of the firm, has become a leading voice in legal ethics reform. The Bar Association is implementing new oversight requirements, he informs me during a partners meeting. Mandatory audits of insurance settlement, patterns, enhanced scrutiny of offshore transactions. Your case changed everything, Catherine. The changes extend beyond procedures and protocols. Dr. Chen leads a medical ethics committee, examining how hospital policies can be manipulated by corrupt practitioners. Dr. Reynolds's cooperation opened our eyes to vulnerabilities we never considered, he explains during a consultation. We're completely revamping how we handle long-term care documentation. Patterson's network continues to unravel. Each arrest leads to new revelations, new connections, new understanding of how deep the conspiracy reached. Martinez keeps me updated on the international developments, though some details remain classified. Lawrence's files are a goldmine, she tells me one evening, as we review case documents. He kept records of every operation, every contact, every potential recruit. Probably thought it was insurance against betrayal. Instead, he handed us a roadmap to the entire organization. Michael attempts to bargain from prison, offering information in exchange for consideration. His lawyer approaches Crawford with a deal, but the evidence from Lawrence's files makes his cooperation unnecessary. Let him sit with his choices, Crawford advises me. He's not getting out, not in this lifetime. The media attention eventually fades, but the case's impact grows. Law schools use it in their ethics courses. Medical schools incorporate it into their training. Insurance companies revamp their fraud detection systems based on the patterns we identified. My own role evolves beyond prosecution. I start consulting with hospitals, teaching them to recognize warning signs. I work with insurance companies, helping them build better safeguards. I speak at conferences, sharing not just the legal implications of my experience, but the human cost of treating patients as commodities. The system only works if we remember what we're protecting, I tell. A room full of medical administrators. Each patient is someone's daughter, sister, wife, not just a policy number or a potential profit. The night nurse who tried to tamper with my IV under Dr. Patterson's orders eventually comes forward, her conscience finally overwhelming her fear. Her testimony helps connect 3 previously unsolved hospital deaths to the conspiracy. Each new revelation brings both satisfaction and sadness. Justice served, but too late for some victims. Claire struggles with guilt, but channels it productively. She establishes a support network for families of fraud victims, using her insider knowledge to help others heal. I can't undo what I almost helped happen, she tells me during a rare vulnerable moment. But I can try to prevent it from happening to anyone else. The firm's reputation recovers, stronger for having exposed the conspiracy rather than enabling it. We specialize now in medical fraud cases, our experience making us uniquely qualified to recognize complex schemes. Each case we prevent feels like another small victory over those who tried to silence me. Late one night, reviewing a suspicious pattern flagged by our new monitoring system, I find myself reflecting on how close I came to becoming just another statistic. The same skills that made me dangerous to their operation, my attention to detail, my understanding of fraud schemes, my prosecutor's instincts, ultimately helped me expose it. Martinez drops by with her usual blend of updates and dark humor. You know what Lawrence said when we arrested him? He claimed you were supposed to be their perfect victim. Instead, you turned out to be their worst nightmare. I smile, remembering all those silent hours in the hospital, gathering evidence even as they plotted around me. They forgot the first rule of prosecution. The perfect crime isn't the one that doesn't leave evidence. It's the one that never happens at all. The work continues, each day bringing new challenges, new schemes to uncover, new lives to protect. But now we're ready, a network of vigilant professionals armed with the knowledge bought at such a high price. They tried to silence one prosecutor, but instead created an army of watchdogs. Ready for tomorrow's task force meeting? Martinez asks, gathering her files. We've got 3 new cases showing similar patterns. I nod, already reviewing the flags, our system identified. They thought they were writing the perfect crime story, I reply. Instead, they wrote the perfect prevention manual. 2 years to the day after I first opened my eyes in that hospital room, I stand before the International Conference on Medical Ethics in Geneva. The auditorium is packed with medical professionals, legal experts, and law enforcement officials from around the world. My story has become more than just a case study. It's become a catalyst for global change. The perfect crime, I begin, my voice carrying clearly through the hall, requires a perfect victim. That's what my husband and his conspirators believed when they chose me as their target. What they created instead was the perfect witness. A murmur runs through the audience. Many of them have read about my case, but few have heard the full story from my own lips. Detective Martinez sits in the front row, alongside Sarah and Anderson. They've become more than colleagues in our ongoing fight against medical fraud. They're family now, bonded by our shared experience. Even Claire is here, though she sits further back, still carrying the weight of her near participation in my attempted murder. Today, I continue, I'm not here to talk about how we caught them. You've read the case files, studied the evidence, seen the outcomes. I'm here to talk about what happens next, how we prevent the next conspiracy, protect the next potential victim, stop the next elaborate scheme before it claims another life. The presentation screen behind me displays statistics. 42 international arrests, 300 million in recovered insurance fraud, 57 prevented attempts identified by our new monitoring systems. But it's the faces I focus on. Photographs of victims who didn't survive similar schemes before we exposed the network. Victor Lawrence's arrest last year marked the end of one conspiracy, I acknowledge, but we'd be naive to think it was the last. As long as there's profit in patient suffering, there will be those who see healthcare as an opportunity for exploitation rather than healing. The changes we've implemented are comprehensive. Every hospital in the international healthcare network now uses enhanced monitoring protocols. Insurance companies employ sophisticated pattern recognition systems designed from our case studies. Law enforcement agencies maintain dedicated medical fraud units trained to spot complex conspiracies. But our greatest defense, I emphasize, isn't in our systems or our protocols. It's in our people. The nurse who notices something unusual and documents it. The administrator who questions an irregular pattern. The investigator who follows a suspicious trail. The prosecutor who connects seemingly unrelated dots. Sarah's documentation system has become the industry standard, implemented in hospitals across 30 countries. She's trained thousands of healthcare professionals to recognize warning signs, to trust their instincts, to protect their patients not just from illness, but from those who would exploit their vulnerability. We've learned that silence can be powerful, I tell the audience, thinking of those long weeks gathering evidence from my hospital bed. But silence in the face of suspicious activity? That's what enables these crimes to succeed. We must create environments where speaking up is not just protected, it's expected. Anderson takes the stage next, outlining the legal framework we've developed. Law firms now undergo regular audits specifically focused on insurance settlement. Patterns. The Bar Association has implemented strict new oversight requirements. Every suspicious merger, every unusual offshore transfer, every pattern that mirrors our case triggers automatic review. Martinez presents the law enforcement perspective, describing how international cooperation helped dismantle Lawrence's network. This case taught us that medical fraud conspiracies don't respect borders, she explains. Our response can't be limited by them either. During the question and answer session, a young doctor from Chicago raises his hand. Last month, we caught an attempted scheme using your protocols, he shares. 2 nurses identified the pattern. A life was saved because of what you taught us. These stories have become increasingly common. Every prevented attempt, every exposed conspiracy, every life saved validates the systems we've put in place. The network that tried to kill me instead created a worldwide web of watchdogs. Claire approaches me after the presentation, her eyes carrying a mix of pride and lingering guilt. I just got word from the FBI task force, she tells me. 3 more firms identified suspicious merger patterns this week, all stopped before they could proceed. Good, I respond, squeezing her hand. Our relationship has evolved, not back to what it was before, but into something new, tempered by experience and dedication to preventing similar crimes. Later that evening, at a small dinner with my core team, Martinez raises her glass. To the worst choice of victim in criminal history, she toasts, drawing laughs from around the table. To vigilance, Sarah counters, her voice carrying the authority of her new role as International Director of Patient Safety Protocols. To justice, Anderson adds, in all its unexpected forms. I look around at these people who helped turn my near tragedy into triumph. The detective who followed her instincts, the nurse who trusted her suspicions, the colleague who refused to accept convenient explanations. Together, we've built something powerful from the ashes of betrayal. My phone buzzes with a message from Crawford. Michael's latest appeal has been denied. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison, along with Patterson and the other conspirators we caught. Lawrence's trial begins next month, with evidence so overwhelming that his legal team is already discussing a plea deal. But it's not their punishment that matters most now. It's the lives saved, the schemes prevented, the message sent to anyone contemplating similar crimes. We're watching, we're ready, we're connected. To the future, I offer my own toast, thinking of all the potential victims who will never know how close they came to being targeted. To every life protected, every conspiracy exposed, every silent witness yet to come. As night falls over Geneva, I stand at my hotel window, watching lights flicker across the international city. Somewhere out there, nurses are checking documentation, investigators are analyzing patterns, prosecutors are connecting dots. The systems we built from my experience work tirelessly, silently protecting vulnerable patients. They thought they were writing my ending. Instead, they helped write a new beginning, not just for me, but for everyone their network might have targeted. Their perfect crime created something they never intended, a perfect defense. The story continues, but not as a tragedy. It evolves as a legacy of protection, vigilance, and justice. Every prevented crime, every exposed conspiracy, every life saved adds another chapter. They tried to silence one voice, but instead created a chorus of guardians. And somewhere, in a hospital room much like the one where my story began, a nurse makes a careful note, a doctor double-checks a chart, an investigator follows a lead. The silent witnesses multiply, the protection grows stronger, and justice finds its way forward, one saved life at a time.